When we two parted in silence and tears, half broken-hearted to sever for years, pale grew thy cheek and cold, colder thy kiss. Truly that hour foretold sorrow to this. The dew of the morning sunk chill on my brow. It felt like the warning of what I feel now. Thy vows are all broken, and light is thy fame. I hear thy name spoken, and share in its shame. They name thee before me, and knell to mine ear. A shudder comes o'er me. Why wert thou so dear? They know not I knew thee, who knew thee too well. Long, long shall I rue thee, too deeply to tell. In secret we met, in silence I grieve, that thy heart could forget, thy spirit deceive. If I should meet thee after long years, how should I greet thee? With silence and tears. I don't like this poem. It's whiny. I mean, come on, everybody goes through a bad breakup, Lord Byron. You take it on the chin like an adult and you move on. What you don't do is publish a passive-aggressive poem about the lady in question with lines like, vows are all broken, light is thy fame, share in its shame, thy spirit deceive. I also dislike the meter. It's too sing-song. Well, now I'm going to read a selection of Byron poems that I do like, and there are many. The Life of George Gordon Byron, the 6th Baron Byron, you can read on Wikipedia. I did. And what's striking to me is all the contradictions. Byron is an outspoken radical ahead of his time and a spoiled rich kid. He is a passionate, sensitive romantic and shockingly nasty, even abusive to the women in his life. He loathed the hypocritical judgment of the religious moralists of his day, and then, as we just heard, goes on to judge everybody around him. He is, in short, a mess, like all of us. And what I like about his poems is the lazy, effortless quality that I assume is the result of tons of work. Unlike this channel, where the laziness and lack of effort is real, it sort of draws you in, like he, the poet, and you, the reader, are sharing a little game. Oh, and a treat for any computer scientists out there, his daughter, Ada Lovelace, is credited with writing the world's first computer programs. They were for Charles Babbage's mechanical analytical engine. In fact, she was the one to suggest you could use it for general computation and not just solve one specific kind of math problem. The background's a sad and funny story. Her mother, Annabel, had a terrible failed marriage with Byron. They were as unsuited for each other as two people can be. Well, after the separation, she decided that the best way to save her daughter from growing into a crazed poet like her father was to train her in mathematics. And it turned out that Ada had a great aptitude for it. But she was also fascinated by her father, who died when she was young, and she inherited his poetic, rebellious temperament. And that is why, to this very day, a lot of programmers are weirdos. I like this poem enough that I'm going to read it twice. She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes, thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies. One shade the more, one ray the less, had half impaired the nameless grace which waves in every raven tress or softly lightens o'er her face, where thoughts serenely sweet express how pure, how dear their dwelling place. And on that cheek and o'er that brow so soft, so calm yet eloquent, the smiles that win, the tints that glow, but tell of days in goodness spent, a mind at peace with all below, a heart whose love is innocent. I love the beginning so much. Then I think it goes a bit downhill. Let's read it again and see what I mean. She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes, thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies. Now, I think those 6 lines are the best thing he ever wrote. It works on so many levels. You can see that he must be writing about a real person, and it captures the look of that certain dark human beauty. But it also works the other way around. You read this, and then you look at a night sky, and you see night itself as feminine and womanly and beautiful. And that combination of the particular and the universal is the most poetic thing about it. But we go on. One shade the more, one ray the less, had half impaired the nameless grace which waves in every raven tress or softly lightens o'er her face, where thoughts serenely sweet express how pure, how dear their dwelling place. And all that is still lovely, but it's unnecessary, it's superfluous, it doesn't really add anything. How pure, how dear. It's kind of fluffy and 19th century fake. Here in the 21st, we don't fall for that anymore. And then, and on that cheek and o'er that brow, so soft, so calm, yet eloquent, the smiles that win, the tints that glow, but tell of days in goodness spent, a mind at peace with all below, a heart whose love is innocent. And it's like, what the hell, Byron? Days in goodness spent, a heart whose love is innocent. The hell you care about innocence? You're Lord Byron. And the insincerity sort of spoils the end for me. If I were Byron's editor, I would have said, hey, George, Gordon, Gord, Gore, just cut the last stanza. Especially because, in 200 years, brow and glow, they're not even going to rhyme. So we'll go no more a-roving, so late into the night, though the heart be still as loving, and the moon be still as bright. For the sword outwears its sheath, and the soul wears out the breast, and the heart must pause to breathe, and love itself have rest. Though the night was made for loving, and the day returns too soon, yet we'll go no more a-roving by the light of the moon. And that one certainly needs no comment. Well, now let's do a funny one. Lines inscribed upon a cup formed from a skull. Start not, nor deem my spirit fled. In me behold the only skull from which, unlike a living head, whatever flows is never dull. I lived, I loved, I quaffed like thee. I died, let earth my bones resign. Fill up, thou canst not injure me. The worm hath fouler lips than thine. Better to hold the sparkling grape than nurse the earthworm's slimy brood, and circle in the goblet's shape the drink of gods than reptiles' food. Where once my wit perchance hath shone, in aid of others let me shine. And when, alas, our brains are gone, what nobler substitute than wine? Quaff while thou canst, another race, when thou and thine, like me, are sped, may rescue thee from earth's embrace, and rhyme and revel with the dead. Why not, since through life's little day our heads such sad effects produce? Redeemed from worms and wasting clay, this chance is theirs to be of use. And now that we're cheered up, here's a long, creepy, vaguely apocalyptic poem about what it would be like on Earth if the sun went out. Darkness. I had a dream, which was not all a dream. The bright sun was extinguished, and the stars did wander darkling in the eternal space, rayless and pathless, and the icy earth swung blind and blackening in the moonless air. Morn came and came, and brought no day. And men forgot their passions in the dread of this their desolation, and all hearts were chilled into a selfish prayer for light. And they did live by watchfires, and the thrones, the palaces of crowned kings, the huts, the habitations of all things which dwell, were burnt for beacons. Cities were consumed, and men were gathered round their blazing homes to look once more into each other's face. Happy were those who dwelt within the eye of the volcanoes and their mountain torch. A fearful hope was all the world contained. Forests were set on fire, but hour by hour they fell and faded, and the crackling trunks extinguished with a crash, and all was black. The brows of men by the despairing light wore an unearthly aspect, as by fits the flashes fell upon them. Some lay down and hid their eyes and wept, and some did rest their chins upon their clenched hands and smiled. And others hurried to and fro and fed their funeral piles with fuel, and looked up with mad disquietude on the dull sky, the pall of a past world. And then again with curses cast them down upon the dust, and gnashed their teeth and howled. The wild birds shrieked and terrified did flutter on the ground and flapped their useless wings. The wildest brutes came tame and tremulous, and vipers crawled and twined themselves among the multitude, hissing but stingless. They were slain for food. And war, which for a moment was no more, did glut himself again. A meal was bought with blood, and each sate sullenly apart, gorging himself in gloom. No love was left. All earth was but one thought, and that was death, immediate and inglorious, and the pang of famine fed upon all entrails. Men died, and their bones were tombless as their flesh. The meager by the meager were devoured. Even dogs assailed their masters, all save one, and he was faithful to a corpse, and kept the birds and beasts and famished men at bay till hunger clung them, or the dropping dead lured their lank jaws. Himself sought out no food, but with a piteous and perpetual moan and a quick, desolate cry, licking the hand which answered not with a caress, he died. The crowd was famished by degrees, but 2 of an enormous city did survive, and they were enemies. They met beside the dying embers of an altar place, where had been heaped a mass of holy things for an unholy usage. They raked up, and shivering scraped with their cold skeleton hands the feeble ashes, and their feeble breath blew for a little life, and made a flame which was a mockery. Then they lifted up their eyes as it grew lighter, and beheld each other's aspects, saw and shrieked and died. Even of their mutual hideousness they died, unknowing who he was upon whose brow famine had written fiend. The world was void. The populous and the powerful was a lump, seasonless, herbless, treeless, manless, lifeless, a lump of death, a chaos of hard clay. The rivers, lakes, and ocean all stood still, and nothing stirred within their silent depths. Ships, sailorless, lay rotting on the sea, and their masts fell down piecemeal. As they dropped, they slept on the abyss without a surge. The waves were dead, the tides were in their grave. The moon, their mistress, had expired before, and the clouds perished. Darkness had no need of aid from them. She was the universe. Creepy, right? And eerily realistic, too. Like, this is roughly what could happen if Vladimir Putin gets cranky and mashes the wrong button. Also one of those rare poems of his that doesn't rhyme. Well, so now we need another light-hearted one of his satirics. Italy. With all its sinful doings, I must say that Italy's a pleasant place to me, who love to see the sun shine every day, and vines not nailed to walls from tree to tree, festooned much like the back sea of a play or melodrama which people flock to see when the first act is ended by a dance in vineyards copied from the south of France. I like on autumn evenings to ride out without being forced to bid my groom be sure my cloak is round his middle strapped about, because the skies are not the most secure. I know, too, that if stopped upon my route where the green alleys windingly allure, reeling with grapes, red wagons choke the way. In England 'twould be dung or dust or a dray. I also like to dine on Becathecus, to see the sunset, sure he'll rise tomorrow, not through a misty morning twinkling weak as a drunken man's dead eye in maudlin sorrow, but with all heaven to himself. The day will break as beautiful as cloudless, not to be forced to borrow that sort of farthing candlelight which glimmers where reeking London's smoky cauldron simmers. I love the language, that soft bastard Latin, which melts like kisses from a female mouth, and sounds as if it should be writ on satin with syllables that breathe of the sweet south, and gentle liquids gliding all so pat in that not a single accent seems uncouth, like our harsh northern whistling, grunting guttural, which we're obliged to hiss and spit and sputter all. I like the women, too, forgive my folly, from the rich peasant cheek of ruddy bronze and large black eyes that flash on you a volley of rays that say 1,000 things at once, to the high dama's brow, more melancholy, but clear, and with a wild and liquid glance, heart on her lips and soul within her eyes, soft as her clime and sunny as her skies. From the light and easy-going Byron, we go to the proud and bitter and rebellious, his Ode to Prometheus, which I might also call his Ode to Atheism. We all know the legend, right? Good, thought so. Titan, to whose immortal eyes the sufferings of mortality, seen in their sad reality, were not as things the gods despise. What was thy pity's recompense? A silent suffering and intense, the rock, the vulture, and the chain, all that the proud can feel of pain, the agony they do not show, the suffocating sense of woe which speaks but in its loneliness, and then is jealous lest the sky should have a listener, nor will sigh until its voice is echoless. Titan, to thee the strife was given between the suffering and the will, which torture where they cannot kill, and the inexorable heaven and the deaf tyranny of fate, the ruling principle of hate, which for its pleasure doth create the things it may annihilate, refuse thee even the boon to die. The wretched gift, eternity, was thine, and thou hast borne it well. All that the thunderer wrung from thee was but the menace which flung back on him the torments of thy rack. The fate thou didst so well foresee, but would not to appease him tell, and in thy silence was his sentence, and in his soul a vain repentance, an evil dread so ill dissembled, that in his hand the lightnings trembled. Thy godlike crime was to be kind, to render with thy precepts less the sum of human wretchedness, and strengthen man in his own mind. But baffled as thou wert from high, still in thy patient energy, in the endurance and repulse of thine impenetrable spirit, which earth and heaven could not convulse, a mighty lesson we inherit. Thou art a symbol and a sign to mortals of their fate and force. Like thee, man is in part divine, a troubled stream from a pure source. And man in portions can foresee his own funeral destiny, his wretchedness and his resistance, and his sad unallied existence, to which his spirit may oppose itself, and equal to all woes, and a firm will and a deep sense, which even in torture can descry its own concentered recompense, triumphant where it dares defy, and making death a victory. Triumphant where it dares defy, and making death a victory. Awesome poem. The pronunciation has changed over the centuries. Now, keeping with the bitter, but getting funny again, this is just a quick quatrain. I think it must be the poetic equivalent of doodling in the corner of a notebook. On my 33rd birthday, through life's dull road so dim and dirty, I have dragged 33. What have these years left to me? Nothing except 33. Now, a bit ironic. That's pretty complaining for someone who was born into the extremely wealthy nobility and who got to be this massive celebrity in his own lifetime and who got to travel and see the world at a time when that was a much rarer privilege than today. But what the hell? I like the loose, sloppy rhymes. It's funny, and it's a bit more poignant when you remember that he was dead at 36. Another short rumination on mortality. This time not Byron's original poem, but his translation of Hadrian's address to his soul when dying. Now, this was originally a Latin poem by the great 2nd century Roman emperor. When Hadrian, at the age of 62, knew he was going to die, he found the time to compose this short poem. Now, apologies in advance, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. Animula vagula blandula, hospes comesque corporis, quae nunc abibis in loca, pallidula, rigida, nudula, nec ut soles dabis iocos. Now, I looked it up, and here's a very literal translation. Little soul, drifter, wanderer, my body's guest and partner, where are you off to now? Somewhere pale, savage, bare, never again to share a joke. Now, watch the fun that Byron has with this version. He manages to get it to rhyme, and I bet, I'm just guessing, that he's getting across more of the playfulness of Hadrian's original version. It comes at a cost. He has to rearrange the lines and grow them from 5 to 6, but I think it's worth it. Ah, gentle, fleeting, wavering sprite, friend and associate of this clay, to what unknown region born wilt thou now wing thy distant flight? No more with wonted humor gay, but pallid, cheerless, and forlorn. Well, since we're being all gloomy now, let's add a touching nostalgic note. Lines written beneath an elm in the churchyard of Harrow. Spot of my youth where hoary branches sigh, swept by the breeze that fans thy cloudless sky, where now alone I muse, who oft have trod with those I loved thy soft and verdant sod, with those who, scattered far, perchance deplore, like me, the happy scenes they knew before. Oh, as I trace thy winding hill, mine eyes admire, my heart adores thee still, thou drooping elm, beneath whose boughs I lay, and frequent muse the twilight hours away, where, as they once were wont, my limbs recline, but without the thoughts which then were mine. How do thy branches, moaning to the blast, invite the bosom to recall the past, and seem to whisper as they gently swell, take, while thou canst, a lingering last farewell. When fate shall chill at last this fevered breast, and calm its cares and passions into rest, oft have I thought 'twould soothe my dying hour, if aught may soothe when life resigns her power, to know some humble grave, some narrow cell would hide my bosom where it loved to dwell. With this fond dream methinks 'twere sweet to die, and here it lingered, here my heart might lie, here might I sleep where all my hopes arose, scene of my youth and couch of my repose, forever stretched beneath this mantling shade, pressed by the turf where once my childhood played, wrapped by the soil that veils the spot I loved, mixed with the earth o'er which my footsteps moved, blessed by the tongues that charmed my youthful ear, mourned by the few my soul acknowledged here, deplored by those in early days allied, and unremembered by the world beside. I like this one because Byron cultivated this image of being, well, Byronic, adventurer and seducer and Greek nationalist, mad, bad, and dangerous to know. And here he is penning a gentle, sweet, somber memorial to his childhood. Now back to a funny one. Queries to Casuists. The moralists tell us that loving is sinning and always are prating about and about it, but as love of existence itself's the beginning, say, what would existence itself be without it? They argue the point with much furious invective, though perhaps were no difficult task to confute it. But if Venus and Hymen should once prove defective, pray, who would there be to defend or dispute it? Which is as much as to say to all those anti-sex people, and they were even worse back then than today, you know, if it wasn't for sex, we wouldn't be here. And lastly, a fragment. I'm a bit irritated because I still haven't been able to figure out if it's an actual fragment of something longer Byron meant to write, or if this is the whole poem and he just titled it a fragment. I like it because it feels sincere. I feel like he's opening up and showing his true self here, and also because he's expressing, among other things, a longing to touch the great souls of centuries ago. And of course, that's exactly what Byron himself is now. Could I remount the river of my years to the first fountain of our smiles and tears, I would not trace again the stream of ours between their outworn banks of withered flowers, but bid it flow as now until it glides into the number of the nameless tides. What is this death? A quiet of the heart? The whole of that of which we are a part? For life is but a vision. What I see of all which lives alone is life to me. And being so, the absent are the dead, who haunt us from tranquility and spread a dreary shroud around us and invest with sad remembrancers our hours of rest. The absent are the dead, for they are cold, and never can be what once we did behold. And they are changed and cheerless, or if yet the unforgotten do not all forget, since thus divided, equal must it be, if the deep barrier be of earth or sea. It may be both, but one day end it must, in the dark union of insensate dust. The under-earth inhabitants, are they but mingled millions decomposed to clay, the ashes of 1,000 ages spread wherever man has trodden or shall tread? Or do they in their silent cities dwell, each in his incommunicative cell? Or have they their own language and a sense of breathless being, darkened and intense as midnight in her solitude? O earth! Where are the past, and wherefore had they birth? The dead are thy inheritors, and we but bubbles on thy surface, and the key of thy profundity is in the grave, the ebon portal of thy peopled cave, where I would walk in spirit, and behold our elements resolved to things untold, and fathom hidden wonders and explore the essence of great bosoms now no more.